Hello, friends. I'm so happy you're here with us. Today, we are talking about creating a healthy culture of authenticity in your marriage with leadership coach Lantz Howard. He's a type 9 and a 9-6 pairing. And if you're a 9 or with a 9 or just have nines in your life, which I know all of us do because 9 is such a common type, it is such a delight and a joy to get to walk with him through his story of wanting to be a person who knows how to do leadership, but yet feels that dig of like, oh my gosh, breaking up the homeostasis. What's this going to do to my family if I start learning about who I am and what I want authentically? And I'm bringing him on today because I think that's a great wrestling question for all of us. And he does such a great job of sharing vulnerably about his journey and coaching others through it that I think you're just in for such a treat. But I want to let you know if you're somebody who cares a lot about authenticity, which you probably are if you press play here. So, yay. This is important because often we want to do the work of digging to find who we are authentically. But some of us aren't nines and we aren't worried as much about what others are going to think or say and do. And sometimes our authenticity is something that our partner doesn't like, or we find we have different values. And so we're going to dig around with Lance in that to ask about that. What's that like when you know you found something about yourself and it may not jive with your partner? And the creativity he brings to that question is just my favorite part of this episode. I hope you'll enjoy it with me too. But there's just so much gold. He shares about his amazing story when his wife found out her type, and there's tears. He'll give us the details about that. There's some intimacy pieces that are just such treasures to get to learn from each other. And I'm just so grateful. So I hope that you will enjoy this episode. I know you will. And make sure you check everything out with him in the show notes. We are also coming up on our 1 year book anniversary. So make sure you leave a review for the book or the pod, and you are entered to win a copy of lots of things that you'll see in the show notes. So I hope you'll take time for that. And let's talk to Lance now. Lance, thank you so much for joining today on the Enneagram and Marriage podcast.
Hey, Krista, man, I am honored to be here. Thank you for creating time and space, and the work that you do is meaningful. As I just mentioned before you hit record, there is an assault on marriages, and I'm thankful for the work that you're doing in this space.
Thank you for naming that. It is so key for people who are listening to know sometimes when you're just thinking life is just happening by chance, it isn't. And
Right.
so, thank you for reminding everybody of that. Like, marriage is really hard to maintain. And that's why I'm so honored that I get to do this and also have awesome guests like you. I know I got to learn about you from Jordan Rayner, our mutual friend, right?
Yes. So honored to be locking arms with Jordan as well.
So awesome. And most specifically, locking arms with Jessica in marriage. Tell us about yourself, your wife. We love to hear about your pairing. You know, our audience loves all of that.
All right, here we go. I'm Lantz Howard. My wife is Jessica. We've been married almost 2 decades, coming up here in a few months. And of course, there has been a few speed bumps in the road, but that's expected. God has grown us up along the journey. I primarily serve as a trusted leadership guide, executive coach, and it's really an intersection of pastoral work, spiritual formation, and also the marriage therapy training and going into the spaces of men's hearts
Mm.
that they allow and creating that safe space for them to become wholehearted in this leadership journey of life and marriage as well. So, my wife is a DNA-based health coach, and we have four
Mm.
girls and 9 to 14, and we're loving life.
Oh my gosh, that's so fun of ages. I love it. I know there's hormones flying, of course, but it's so beautiful that you guys have your four girls. And what are your Enneagram types?
Yeah, so I am an Enneagram 9 and my wife is 6. As I mentioned, we'll get into this a little. It had to be, I think, 8 years ago when I first stumbled into the Enneagram, and my wife was a year or two behind, in her research and learning and insights. And I'll share that story later, but it really took our marriage to the next level. And me, sometimes I really lack empathy. I saw her in a totally new way once I had a fresh understanding of what the six really was and the chaos that I was causing in the family at that season of our life.
Wow. So learning about Enneagram specifically helped you to meet her heart's needs in a very real way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When your wife is have tears coming down her face and you're on a 6 hour car ride home listening to Suzanne Stabile at the time of Know Your Number,
Mhm.
and six in that teaching is the last number. And she's like, well, will I ever learn about myself in this? And,
Mm.
it was really a validating moment for her because we were truly on one of the wilderness seasons that we've been on. I mean, this was an 18-month wilderness season specifically that was happening at that time, more around my own identity, my occupation, and what I
Mhm.
was pursuing,
Mhm.
but how that was wreaking havoc for her in structure, safety, stability, wanting to know a plan. She trusted me all along the way, but as a
Mhm.
nine, I'm like, it's all going to be great. Like, it's all going to work out.
Yeah.
But she just wanted a little bit more structure and plan put together that I was not offering in my leadership role.
Yes, and that is so, as we were talking before today, key in the 9-6 pairing for other 9-6s listening or anyone with a 9 spouse. It's especially the male. You're saying, I did my best to be good at harmonizing, but she needed some structure and some leadership. And I love that we can name that here. And it sounds like you've worked on that a lot, and maybe even when she met you, she saw hints of that. Well, let me go back there for a minute. When you guys met, what do you think really attracted you to each other in those early days?
Oh man, so that was 2+ decades ago.
Yeah.
This is a story that if you were sitting in our living room, that we would share. So I'll share it here.
Yay.
She was very direct and forthright with three very clear questions.
Mm,
I'm myself in that season. I had just finished graduating college at Lubbock Christian University.
mm,
She still had 2 years left at Abilene Christian University,
mhm,
and our circles collided. And for her not to waste time in that season of life, she said, "Do you drink? Do you smoke? And are you a virgin?" And I guess 2 decades later, here we are. So I answered them appropriately. But even in that question, and we laugh about it now, uh, there was sincerity in it. But we also come to realize, like growing up in purity culture,
Yeah.
like I didn't see my own self-righteousness in
Mm,
that. And I've come a long way of really embracing the grace that God has offered us in our marriage. Because no matter how you answer those questions, does not define you as a person, especially if you're whole or not whole, whatever your definition of those three questions are. But
yeah.
that's who she is. She's direct, she's clear, she knows what she wants. And she's able to kind of stay more stable in that path than I am, because sometimes I just kind of merge with
Yep.
whoever's around me. I can bring everybody together to the table really, really well.
Mhm.
But as you know, nines don't advocate for themselves real well. And
Mhm.
so that's been my journey of really understanding the context of the Enneagram, what it means for me to be wholehearted and not to be the nice guy who just goes along to get along, but actually stands up and champions not only myself, but champions more meaningful people around me as well.
Mm, that's really neat. I really have not thought about that much. I have to a point because I see nines as making great leaders. But you really named it just now in a clarified way to say when nines start learning how to stand up and advocate for themselves, they can also do that for others.
Mm, yes. The eight comes in heavy
Mm,
because I can advocate for others, but sometimes I'll be honest, sometimes it's out of a pretentious spirit of secretly not really knowing how to name what I want
mm,
in that relationship. So I hope now it comes instead of what I call sideways energy. I hope it comes out in very clear, calm, and connected ways that are more rooted in a sense of God-given confidence.
yes, I believe that's true. And it sounds like your wife liked helped you because you had these, like you said, these accolades about you to her satisfaction, but deeply probably felt some of your peace. And as you said, you loved how direct and how much she knew what she wanted. But it sounds like over the years, there was trials that the two of you had to walk through because, of course, what we love about our mate also becomes the hardest pieces.
Mhm.
So as you have come to bring others in leadership and yourself too, what would you say was one of the reasons that you knew you had to do this? Like, this is the work I have to do. This is my calling. Is it because of a personal story or just because what you were seeing with others in the world?
In the words of Henry Nouwen, I don't know if it's necessarily always going to be true for people, but I think there is this essence of that we become wounded healers, like
Mhm.
that piece of us that God desires to bring more wholeness to. He ends up using that for our good and our benefit, but ultimately for His glory and His honor. And I think sometimes in my pride, my pretentious spirit, I thought I had it all together. Like, right, I'm the good guy.
Mhm.
Everybody loves me. I did the pastoral thing for a very long time. I knew how to play the dance, right? But I really became a shell of a person, and I didn't know that at the time. But more in particular, the first couple of years of our marriage, you know, she comes from some sexual abuse trauma. I was addicted to masturbation,
Mhm.
and we did not know how to have sexual intimacy. Like, we did not know how to connect in the bedroom.
Mhm.
Uh, and so we sought help with that for the first couple of years of our marriage, and it began a journey of us really unpacking, uncovering what emotional intimacy was. I was already working on my marriage and family therapy degree in that
Yeah.
season. But I think as life goes along, right, suffering and grief is always a part of life, and things happen that God always takes a scalpel to, and it's like, hey, like, I still want to form you more in the way of Jesus if you allow me.
Yeah.
And so in that, it really has shown a spotlight on, excuse me, for me, of how to speak up for my desires, wants, and needs,
Yeah.
because they matter.
Yes.
Um, and I think, like, sometimes we don't see that they matter. Like, right, as a good guy, it's like, well, I'm a good guy. Like, I don't, I don't have any glaring
Mhm.
concerns other than pride, which is a pretty glaring concern
Right.
if you're God.
Right.
So that's been the biggest crux for me to really realize, is that nobody else knows my needs. Nobody else knows my desires. And it's my stewardship to speak up on behalf of those if I want to steward the gifts that God has given me well.
Yeah, he made you with desires. And that's for sure. When we look at the human as an act of God's creation, we see each of us comes with desires. And by you sort of self abnegating those and saying, nope, my pride is I'm good to go. I don't need anything. I can take care of me. You lost intimacy with your wife. Sounds like you also weren't doing some of your emotional work. And so we're not condemning you. We're just saying it's wonderful that you've been able to learn this. I love that you got some of that through your marriage and family therapy training and in your own work doing this with your wife. That took a lot of courage for her as a six. I know that's her virtue. So she was brave and did the work with you. Um, how did you begin to go into that space of allowing yourself to see what you needed emotionally? Did you use internal family systems? Did you just allow yourself to sit in the deeper spaces? Like, that's very hard for most of us to get to that deeper space.
I would say one of the first times was when I hired my own personal executive coach. I mean, we're talking 12 plus years ago,
Mm.
advocating for a desire, right, to work with a coach in very deep and meaningful ways. Because I was at a crossroads of like, man, I want to do something other than ministry.
Mhm.
And I really thought at the time that it was the path of marriage and family therapy.
Mhm.
But knowing my skill sets and my giftings now, I'm much more of a maximizer, futuristic thinking. So everything I do is always solution focused. It's always in the future. I
Yes.
don't really, I'm not saying that it's not important. I don't really sit in the past, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
I honor it and I
Yeah.
bring meaning to that story, but that meaning of that story shapes how you interact with the future. And so for me, the last, 12 plus years really has been a growth journey from like hiring a coach to doing, it's called regeneration, 12-step recovery stuff, to going to Suzanne Stabile and Joe Stabile's workshops, to really just doing the layers upon layers, right? Because, I have a birthday this month. I'll be 44. I think our growth never stops, right? And so if we were to do this in a decade from now, I hope that there's some new insight and learning as well.
Yeah, I love that you had all this growth over the past 12 years and doing this, piece by piece by piece, you began to realize I'm leaving myself behind.
Mm,
And I think that once you realize you don't want to do that anymore, if I'm right about how nines have to work, is like now you have this new issue of how do I get even to figure out what I need? Did
mm,
that hit you where you weren't sure what you needed?
absolutely. I would say even as recent of last year, going through some more work, I did some forgiveness coaching with Bruce Hebel and Forgiving Forward. And I didn't realize that there was unresolved work around specifically the relationship with my mom and I, going back to post high school or pre college, of feeling like I didn't have a sense of voice to speak up for the college that I actually wanted to attend. And
Mhm.
so here I am with Bruce leading this forgiveness session, and he's like, "Well, who do you need to forgive first?" Uh, and here I was. I thought it was some board of directors and some
Yeah.
some very tense conflict that I was in
Yeah.
18 months ago, and the
Yeah.
Holy Spirit just convicted me. It's like, your mom, and I'm like, "Oh, that's weird. My mom and I have a great relationship, uh, but." Even in that insight, it was a reminder, going back to your question of the need to recover the voice that God has given me, right?
Oh.
It's not my mom's fault. It's not my wife's fault. It's I've got to honor myself. And I think sometimes we
Wow.
just get so confused on what that means of like, I always talk about the blind man in Bartimaeus, Mark chapter 10.
Mhm.
Jesus asks over and over throughout scripture. He's like, well, what do you want? Like he wants to pursue the desires of our hearts,
Yeah.
but he can only do that in as much as what we're actually willing to give life to those and speaking those out loud. So that's how I would contextualize, speaking up for the needs in this season.
Wow. And so you're really speaking to my heart on a very, very personal way because I never want to leave your story, but I have to at least say this caveat that I'm having a meeting in the next 45 minutes or so with my 9 wing 8 daughter about college. So I'm like a little bit nervous now, like, do this right. But we're having like such a seriously hard time together. And even today she was like, Mom, I just feel so bad. I don't want to do something wrong in my search for college. I feel like they don't have my major at the college I want to go to. Am I going to have to switch majors? Am I going to have to switch colleges? And there's just so many questions. And so knowing what we all now know about Enneagram nines, it's like we just see the holiness of like laying it out to God. But like you said, if the nine can't wake up to do their work, there's going to be something missing. And so I love that you allowed yourself to say, I have had some issues with people in my life, including mom, but I also am doing my work around it too.
Yeah, yeah. Krista, you make a good point, and that's the beauty of the Enneagram, is us trying to embrace all the numbers versus just saying like I am this.
Mhm.
Even before our time together today, I was coaching one of my long-term owner operator clients, and he's an Enneagram 7, like
Mm.
yourself.
Yeah.
And I have to remind myself, and kind of reflecting back on what you're saying about your daughter, uh, that this thing that we're doing called life, that God has given us this gift in, it's just one big playground. Like it's a big sandbox. And if we can relax and embrace joy and wonder and curiosity and not make it feel like this decision is a permanent decision for the rest of my life. I think that's the gift that probably
Mhm.
sevens offer, right? Uh,
Mhm. Yeah.
but to me, it's like, no, just stay steady, but it's like, no,
Yeah.
there's curiosity and wonder and play. And so I think, just how do you hold all the numbers together, and
Yeah.
helping her explore, hey, this isn't a forever decision. Like, right? It's okay.
Yes, that's true.
Uh,
We have been trying to say that to her. And so it's like, even though she's a body type who wants to do it right, we're like, nobody really does it right when they're
right.
16 years old trying to figure this out. So I thank you for saying that. That just helps my own six wing. I just feel like you're saying it's important that we don't push a nine to make decisions if they're not ready. So maybe we can talk that out a little. The reason I say that is a lot of our listeners are nines. And after you and I had talked about episode prep and what we might talk about, I felt like I was having a lot of sessions with people who were nines and who were coming into that space of how do we learn to make decisions. And so, on the one hand, you said kind of forgiving other people and learning to make decisions ourselves. But have you done to try to figure out and honor who you are and the choices you want to make?
Sure. One of the things I have done, and it's homework that I give coaching clients, even if they don't even work with me, is really going back to that question: what do you want? Because I have not met a man yet that comes to me with such profound clarity that they can answer what they see in a decade, 3 years, 1 year, 90 days, right? So it really starts with this journaling exercise of like, hey, it's just you in this journal. Like suppose nobody ever sees it, right? Like
Mm,
see if you can get to a list of 100 things that you unapologetically want. And so building out that muscle is important to become aware of really what's going on, but then to actually begin that practice every single day of like, okay, what does today look like in light of 3 years from now or 90 days from now? And I unapologetically want steak tonight. The family's having salmon, but you know what? I want
mhm,
steak.
mhm,
You may or may not get that, and that comes back to self-differentiation and being aware of like how do you hold on to yourself when you don't get validated or what you want.
mm,
But I think it is still getting comfortable. For example, with myself in the steak reference, being at the grocery store with your wife and being like, "Hey, I want some steak this week," and I don't necessarily think we need to buy it for the whole family all
mhm,
week long.
mhm,
Um, so I think that's one way that it begins to look like of how do you experiment with more love, joy, peace, and freedom for yourself, but then that begets a gift to other people around you because you begin to take up more space, and they're like, "Oh, this
mhm,
person's a different person."
mhm,
Right? You're walking more wholeheartedly in the world and not playing small anymore. So that'd be a very practical tool to give the listeners is just start naming what you want in a daily practice in a journal, and then working towards verbalizing those things that need to be verbalized.
mm. That's a really great exercise. Thank you for that. And I think it helps nines to do that work with themselves. And that helps me as an assertive aggressive type who stared my daughter in the face and asked her in three different ways, what do you want to do for your career? And I thought that asking creatively, like, what if a newspaper article was describing you? What if this was your epitaph? Like all these ways, I thought one of them would get through. And she eventually burst into tears. And she's
Mm,
like, that feels like so much pressure. And I was so happy she told me she needed options. But what I think you're adding to that step, I mean, we had a really good intimate moment right there where, of course, I was able to be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I love you so much. That was not my intention. I thought this would be helpful, creative brainstorming, but I'm a brain type. And she's like, I think what you just said just makes so much sense that you said they need to sit with themselves. People
mm,
who are in this space can't always do this work with another person because you're working so hard to harmonize with that other person. Is that right?
mhm. Yeah, yeah, that's true. Well, and another example on that, there's a local restaurant I go to and I get a smoothie there.
Mhm.
And I'm always typically meeting somebody there when I go.
Mm.
It's a muscle frappuccino. Um, and so instead of ordering all the extra frap, the sugar that goes with it, I always ask them to cut that out. Right.
Mhm.
And so I was with a guy a few weeks ago, actually, a few months ago, and he's like, "Well, I didn't know you could do that." And I'm like, just because that menu says XYZ, it,
Yeah.
you have permission to play in this sandbox,
Oh,
right? And so I think that's another safe way that I give men to experiment and play with low cost opportunity. There's not a
yeah.
lot at stake, right? And so you show up to a restaurant and you try to get playful and
Mhm.
experiment with like, you know what, this isn't on the menu, but could the chef actually make this instead? So I think it's looking for ways to be creative on making yourself known and your presence known
Mhm.
in this pursuit of speaking up for your needs.
Yeah. And you really showed how other people can learn from you once you do that.
Sure.
So that's like it keeps on giving. But you just said, even nines can be very creative and or anybody in this position who doesn't feel like they're exercising their voice. And then to be able to realize you can also think outside of the box is such a gift. Now, one of my favorite topics to talk with people about is when we start to grow healthy, it usually throws our spouse off, and it's like, how dare you go get healthy on me, even if that's what I was requesting all along. So when you coach others, when you've done some of your own self leadership, what do you tell people about that? What have you personally learned about that? And I know with you guys, Jessica may have been right on board. Like, I love it. You're exercising your leadership. But I feel like there's always a sticking point with most spouses where it's like we do want it, but it's just changes so hard. Can you tell us a little bit about how we might do that together?
Absolutely. There's always one spouse, one person in a marriage who is more accepting, more receiving of the growth process.
Mhm.
And without, going into too much of the theory and systems behind marriage and family therapy,
Mhm.
like homeostasis is what we all desire.
Mhm.
It's where the thermostat is set and it's like a comfortable place for everybody. And
Yeah.
if that dial gets messed with a little bit, then everybody in the whole home has to adjust and figure out what their response is to that.
Mm.
So I think being aware of your own emotional anxieties, your own emotional fears, and trying to hold on to that and grow your heart in a way that says, you know what, this is not a wrong response. This is just a neutral response, right? If the air conditioner gets moved, if the thermostat gets moved,
Mhm.
it's not right or wrong. It's just a preference. And
Mhm.
so now you have a choice to say, you know what, I'm a little bit cold. I
Mhm.
can grab and complain that I'm cold, or I can be a problem solver and go get a blanket,
Yeah.
right? So I think it's learning how to do this dance together in a way that says, you know what, that's their preference. It's not right or wrong, and it's not even what I would want.
Yeah.
But I can be an emotionally whole adult and choose a more appropriate response versus anger, or in the nines case, a passive aggressive response that blows up the whole system. So
Mm.
just really paying attention to your response in that balance of homeostasis, and really what is it saying about your opportunity for growth, and not so much about what it says for your spouse, right? Because we always see how other people need to change and grow much faster than ourselves. So I think it's really just getting curious with yourself, uh, and your role in that system.
That's so good. You're right. And even great for me to hear that everybody has that fundamental attribution error, thinking we're a little bit healthier. Everybody does these cognitive heuristics to quickly tell a quick story about me. I'm tired, but for them, it's that they were mean to me. And
Mm.
so you're allowing us to remember, pay attention to the narrative about yourself, give them grace, but also don't lose what you need to do. Once again, just like with career, I think you're saying be creative, think outside of the box, think about
Mhm.
solutions that honor both of you, which is really lovely to hear.
Sure.
Um, oh, that's so good. So you mentioned in the past that one of the issues was that you felt like you couldn't I don't know if you didn't talk about sex, or if you felt like you really just didn't have the emotional tools and now you do. But what's a way now you stay present to your needs sexually as a husband in conflict, like just a way that you feel like this is something I do now? And it might be the journal thing. It might be that you take daily journaling, but is there a practice you do to stay connected with yourself and your needs that you can maybe even recommend to some of our listeners?
Sure. I would say even rewinding, 2+ decades ago, because the story matters in terms of like understanding like what your paradigm and belief system is on sexual connection.
Mm,
And for men, I think it's super important for those that are listening just to understand at a deeper level of things. When we want sex, it
mhm,
actually is saying, you know what, I want emotional connection.
mm,
It doesn't come out that way. We don't communicate it that way.
mm,
But I think just being aware of like, okay, what really is the emotional need in this moment? Because sex is amazing. This God-given gift in a covenant marriage is amazing. So how do I receive that? Um, but also how do I honor my spouse in the process? And so, in a very practical thing that I've done, and I'm not sure when it started, but is paying attention to my breathing. Some would call it meditation, some would call it centering prayer, but really just come and trying to come down into my body and pay attention to what my body's actually experiencing. And so
mm,
even before recording this podcast, I just had a few moments and I just took, 90 seconds and just took a few deep breaths and just to try to be present to this room, this environment, to myself, and to quiet all the anxiety around me. Uh, and how that shows up more importantly in the bedroom is that over the years, as I've practiced that, my wife has even responded as like, man, you seem really calm and at peace and confident right now. And then the beautiful thing is that when you get your breathing synchronized, then it takes the sexual energy to a whole nother space. And so that would be the gift is to pay attention to your breathing because at the end of the day, our sexual interactions are not a quick fix, right? The more present we can be to ourselves, the more meaningful sex can be. Instead of this 5-minute game, it turns into this marathon approach of like, oh, it's amazing to be able to receive love, but
mhm.
it's also amazing to be able to give from a space of wholeheartedness as well.
Mm. That's really beautiful. And thank you for just enlightening us about that emotional need too behind the sexual requests. And I think I've heard you talk about this on your podcast. I've heard, obviously, so many wonderful speakers talk about this. But from a man's perspective, I can't do that. And I love how you're saying this is something that you've noticed over the course of your work, your own work, and that is that men are approaching for sex, obviously for the testosterone needs, but for the connecting needs. And so, even just when husbands are approaching their wives, just breathing, you said, but also just allowing yourself to realize, I need her emotionally, and being vulnerable in that space. Has that helped your wife to feel safe too? Just that you're not just coming at her doggedly, but that you're coming at her with, I have needs too that aren't just sexual?
Yeah, I would say specifically on the 9 and 6 thing, and this may be true more on the male female thing. The more that I make my desires known or my preferences known,
Mhm.
man, it gives her such peace and freedom, right? Versus in the moment, it
Mhm.
feels like it feels sneaky,
Mm,
it feels sideways to her, and it's not integrous, to what
mhm,
we're pursuing in a marriage.
mhm,
And for me to have the courage to be like, oh, so you actually want me to speak up
mhm,
beyond the bedroom about these sexual interactions. It gives her robust freedom and courage and confidence, and then in return, when her confidence goes up outside the bedroom, of course it's going to go up inside the bedroom as well. So I think just a great reminder for myself. It was like, don't be sneaky or passive
Mm.
about your sexual preferences.
Yes, I love that. And that gives you guys a chance to really dialogue. And I think that's really important. And you're also letting her know that, you're learning about your emotions at large. You're not doing all of your therapy, if you will, only around the bedroom, which we know a lot of guys do because that's the only place they've ever been able to receive nurture. But I bet you're so much healthier because you're also doing work outside of the bedroom.
Sure, 100%. We to well, maybe this is just actually one thought. In
Mhm.
particular, what that looks like for myself in this season and for her. Uh, she was just on a women's trip just a few weeks ago, right? With her male friends, or her female friends bonding. I just got back from a backpacking trip for 7 days with my male friends bonding. And so I think even just understanding what emotional work looks like, it's paying attention to the number one concern that's going on in our communities is the fact of loneliness. The loneliness epidemic is driving anxiety and depression and all the stats behind that.
Yeah.
But work isn't always like, oh, I got to show up to a coach or I got to go see a therapist. Like work is actually saying, you know what? I want to raise my hand. I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to initiate relationships in my life and I'm going to go do something fun that brings me joy, wonder, and awe. And so
Mm.
we're in that season now together of like, how do I champion you and your female friends and how does she champion me? And then we get to go to the beach together in 6 weeks and we'll have an amazing time at the beach. So it's a beautiful dance of like, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, don't overwhelm yourself reading books and hearing emotional work, but it's just like creating space for relationships
Mhm.
that you can show up and be authentic with.
Wow, that is a great reminder for me as a head type, but also for the listeners because they have to deal with the shadows of my head type coming out through the airwaves all the time. So, this is good for us to hear, guys. We are reminded of the fact that the healing comes through these other spaces and ways too. And I'm so grateful for you, Lance, sharing that with us and just opening the door to vulnerability and authenticity here because, like you said, this is where you are today. These are the things you're learning now. And there's even more than that we got to hear today, but there'll be more to come. And I'm so grateful because you're doing beautiful work out there and you're a leader to a lot of guys who aren't yet having that privilege to do this work. So tell us about how people can find you and your wonderful work and podcast and all the rest.
Absolutely. I'm honored. Uh, primarily, LantzHoward.com, Lantz, Howard.com. You can find my podcast work at Wholehearted Leader, where I feature the most recent guests, John Tyson, John Eldridge, marriage experts, men, thought leaders, former CEOs. So I'm definitely active in that space. But yeah, I'd be honored to connect with anybody. And if you want any daily content, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn as well.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much for this work, this time, and just being here with us today. It was such a privilege to chat with you.
Thank you, Krista.
Thank you so much for tuning in with me. What a joy it is to have great conversations that are so rich. So excited to just have one more great space for you and listen that he has a podcast too, and so many other spaces to connect with people as a coach. So, love to bring you that safety. Hope that you enjoy and truly take time for one thing from this episode, maybe even the wonderful practice of the 100 things. Even if you're not a nine, Wes and I did this for 5 minutes on a date night, and we had such a good time taking just a few minutes for that question. It was a great question. So we love digging in, and we found some of the things we had same. We didn't share everything. Well, he did. I had two things, little things, tiny things that I was like, this isn't even about you. So no worries. But I love that you guys are growing with me here. And thank you. And check out everything in the show notes. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.